Today we're going to be taking a look at Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD-2D Remake on Switch 2. It's the origin of every slime, every classic hero, and basically it's the foundation of the modern JRPG. And these games, they really help define a genre, but now they're back with a full HD-2D makeover. So in this one I want to cover story, gameplay, visuals, audio, what's new, and of course then performance. And if this video helps you out today, do me a favor and hit subscribe. It really does help the channel a huge amount. Alright, let's get into it. Narratively then, these two titles, it's where it all started. Yes, 3 is a prequel, hence they released that remake first. But here you can still feel the weight of that history. You know, Dragon Quest 1 is incredibly focused. There's a dragon lord that's threatening this world, there's a princess that's been abducted, and hope is fading. Then there's you, the lone descendant of Erdrick. Basically, you're stepping forward with nothing but a sword and a mission. Now, the remake itself adds some subtle new scenes and visual storytelling moments that definitely help emotional beats just land a little more clearly, but overall it's still a straightforward journey that just feels a little bit more atmospheric and a little bit more intentional in how it tells that story. Now, Dragon Quest 2 then is really where the ambition kicked in. The world has grown, time has passed, and you're now following 4 heroes, all carrying that Erdrick bloodline. Kingdoms crumble, families are torn apart, and there's a genuine sense of building resistance against an overwhelming darkness. Now, this game really ties the first and the third entries together in a way that feels really kind of nice and cohesive, and it's really impressive how they've presented that narrative and expanded upon it. There's also more character here. There's more humor, more NPC reactions when that party does expand. And yeah, there's a dash of extra writing as well, just to remind you this world is bigger, I guess, than the classic it's built on. Gameplay then across both titles sticks to that traditional turn-based combat, but each game plays differently enough to make this feel like a double bill rather than, I guess, two halves of the same experience. Now, in Dragon Quest 1, it's you versus the world. You don't have a healer to, fall back on. If you overshoot a dungeon or forget the rest, that's on you. And that vulnerability is actually one of the things that makes this recreation feel so satisfying. It's simple, but only having one character on a battlefield, the mistakes definitely, they matter. Battles now also allow multiple enemies at once. That is new for this entry. There's also new abilities, and the UI is so much easier to navigate. Combat is all about strategy in this first entry, so that really goes a long way. Now, it is still a short experience, maybe a dozen or so hours, but it's paced really well, and I just enjoy, we don't see many short RPGs anymore, so the kind of feeling of always pushing forward, yeah, in 2025, it's a nice little palate cleanser. Dragon Quest 2 then was really where the expansion happened, and you see that immediately. It brings in the full party setup, and suddenly you're thinking about turn order, resistances, spell coordination. Enemies appear more frequently in proper groups now, and even early fights can go badly very quickly if you're not paying attention. Dungeons as well, I think there's more to them, more, let's say, verticality, meaning different floors. And it's going to really drive home those puzzle elements. You don't see too many of them in Dragon Quest 1. In Dragon Quest 2, it's definitely a feature. With the second one as well, I also found I was kind of going off the beaten path a little bit more. It gave me more reasons to go explore. Now, there are progression systems built around collecting mini medals and scrolls. That's a new feature for both entries. Basically, they teach you unique spells or give you permanent boosts. And while the original NES version was absolutely brutal in its back half, yeah, still very much the case here. So just expect, again, in Dragon Quest 1 and 2, you're going to have to grind at moments. There's no way you can just run in a straight line with these games. You're going to have to build up your hero, level up, learn new abilities before you will progress. It is challenging, but it never feels, in my opinion, unfair. You're not forced to grind endlessly, I guess would be the way I'd put it. I think, if anything, it's actually a little bit softer now than it was on the NES, but they've definitely not forgotten those roots. And I think the highlight for me, honestly, outside of the combat and the narrative, has actually been the exploration, which I didn't necessarily expect going in. It's actually surprising how large the second game in particular is. You'll unlock a boat roughly mid-game. There's towns with all sorts of hidden secrets and bits and pieces going on. The shrines that appear empty until, yeah, I won't reveal secrets. There's just a really nice sense of discovery. And instead of like vague clues that can feel cryptic, you can even now turn on at the very beginning of the game objective markers. Just punch you towards that next location without just, I guess, handing it over. Now, someone like that, it's definitely going against kind of the natural exploration and figuring things out. I actually quite enjoyed it, honestly, personally. It really makes it, kind of streamlines the experience. You still got the challenging combat ahead of you, but just having kind of a little sense of where you should be heading next actually made it a little bit more enjoyable. If you don't want it, again, turn it off. Completely up to you. I know that's probably not going to sit well with like purists out there, so it's nice that it's an option and not a forced feature. I also really like in combat something called tactics. You can basically tell your characters how you want them to fight. Maybe they're defensive, maybe they're all-out attack. And when you turn that on, you just literally press action and the game actually does it for you. I wouldn't use that permanently. You can't handle some of the bigger enemies, but what I really liked about it was using it in the early game when, you know, it was a little bit of a breeze. I could just kind of like fly through these battles without using my brain power too much and just carry on with the narrative, getting to the points where, you know, where I wanted to be. It just made the pacing really comfortable. Outside of that then, I think one of the other big benefits of this remake is flow. You know, it's quick saving for you pretty much consistently throughout the experience, so there's no fear of, you know, flying absolutely miles back. Again, auto battles, it's not just the enjoyability factor there that I just mentioned, but also it means grinding becomes a little bit easier. It's a little bit less, I don't know, repetitive, because you can just kind of like relax, sit back, let it do its like thing. And then the inventory and equipment menus, all that micromanagement, it's actually really nice to navigate now, definitely being updated to 2025 standards. So I think if anything, from a gameplay perspective, it's kind of exactly what I wanted. They've respected the originals, but they've kind of smoothed out a few of the, you know, rough edges. Remember, these games released years ago. They were classics, they still are classics, but they definitely feel their age at points. So this release definitely helps with that. Visually then, the HD-2D style feels like it was invented for Dragon Quest. You know, the pixel art heroes have always been iconic, but now they're supported by beautiful lighting, depth of field, all sorts of animations, and yet it just gives this world so much atmosphere. It's almost like what it hinted at wanting to be back in the day. You know, towns feel warmer, fields are wider, the world is massive, caves darker. These environments, for me, they finally match the imagination you used to kind of, you know, fill in the gaps when you played on a system like the NES. Performance then on Switch 2 is, let's say, strong. You have two modes. One prioritizes higher frame rates, a smooth 60 FPS with a slightly softer image. The other aims for a sharper resolution, but at around 30. Now in handheld, the 60 FPS mode feels fantastic. You know, panning across maps and battles, it just feels so much cleaner. Docked, the sharper mode looks great on a big screen, but you will notice the drop in fluidity if you're sensitive to motion. For me, I went 60 throughout my time with the game, and that's exactly what you're seeing on screen right now. Finally, the audio. It's been treated with real care. The original soundtrack has been fully reorchestrated, and it's stunning. Familiar melodies now feel massive and, yeah, again, very 2025. And environmental touches like wind sweeping through, you know, locations or echoes or whatever it may be, you know, the ruins. It just adds a sense of atmosphere that expands the experience. There are even some small voice moments to reinforce key scenes, and it's not fully voiced, but you'll find English and Japanese language in here as well. So overall then, I'm genuinely impressed. You know, they're tiny reminders of the era these games came from. Now, I will admit they do show their age. Sometimes the objective, actually on more than a few occasions, is still like, talk to this person, then walk all the way back to where you came from. Also, I do wish the Switch 2 had a single performance mode that offered a best of both worlds option, basically, you know, 60 and higher resolution. I feel like that should be possible with this hardware. But honestly, for me, small gripes in what is otherwise an incredibly well done remake. You know, these are two landmark RPGs that just still hold up, now presented with stunning visuals, modern touches, and yeah, I think the respect they deserve. So if you love JRPGs, I think these are essential. And if you've ever been curious about where the genre almost began, you know, these early days of the genre at least. It's one of the best ways to experience that history without, you know, digging out an NES, finding the cartridges, all that kind of good stuff. The only real complaint I have about this release, it's actually in relation to how they've dropped them on Switch 1 and Switch 2. It's almost like Square Enix are not quite sure which angle to take yet, but basically, if you want the Switch 1 build, you got to buy Switch 1. If you want Switch 2, you got to buy Switch 2. There's no upgrade path at all. No paid one, no free one, nothing. If you are a physical collector, that means you're going to want to go Switch 1 because it's fully on cartridge. However, when you look at Square Enix's recent history, Dragon Quest III HD-2D got a free upgrade. Romancing Saga got a paid upgrade. This one has no upgrade. Now, granted, both of those previous games were on the Switch 1 originally before making their way to Switch 2. I don't know. I don't think any of the studios know how to get this quite right yet, but I really want to see upgrade paths so physical collectors are kept happy as well. You know, that is going to be paramount to all of them out there. And if there's any genre where physical is important, I really do think it is JRPGs. But look, on the games themselves, just purely on the experience, yeah, amazing 9 out of 10 from me. Classic adventures, meaningful upgrades, and I think a perfect fit for portable play. So yeah, Dragon Quest is back at the beginning, and it still feels incredible. Alright, so thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the review today, hit that subscribe button, helps the channel a huge amount, and I'll see you on the next one. Cheers all.